They didn't survive because their cupboards were full. They survived because they knew how to turn nothing into a meal. During World War II, when food lines stretched around blocks and supply ships never came, ordinary people performed quiet miracles in their kitchens. They reinvented cooking itself. Every meal was a battlefield of its own, fought with empty shelves, cold stoves, and a fierce will to endure. These weren't comfort foods, they were survival codes. And today, with fragile supply chains and rising global uncertainty, these forgotten wartime recipes might just be the lifelines we'll need again. So, let's step into those blackout kitchens and uncover 8 lost World War II food recipes. Not for nostalgia, but because the same knowledge that once kept entire families alive could do the same for us. Acorn bread, the forest's secret grain. When flour disappeared during the war, families didn't wait for it to return. They went to the forests. What they found underfoot, acorns, became their answer to empty shelves. Acorns are rich in carbohydrates, fats and protein, but raw, they're bitter and toxic from tannins. The wartime solution was ingenious shell, crush and soak the meal in cold water for several days, changing it often. This ancient method leached away the bitterness, leaving a mild, nutty flour. Families mixed the acorn flour with small amounts of whatever wheat or rye they could still find. The dough was dense and slow to rise, but baked into dark, earthy loaves that stayed fresh for days without spoiling. Some made it entirely from acorn meal, creating a crumbly but filling bread that demanded patience and knowledge more than ingredients. It was food that required no fields, no trade, no permission, only resourcefulness. In a crisis, the ability to turn the forest floor into nourishment could mean the difference between hunger and strength. Nettle soup, the green hope of spring. Long before grocery stores stocked spinach and kale, wartime families turned to something most of us step over without a glance: stinging nettles. As winter rations dwindled, nettles were often the first edible green to emerge from the thawing soil. Boiled for a few minutes, their sting vanished, revealing tender iron-rich leaves packed with vitamins that bodies starve for after months of preserved food. Cooks tossed them into pots of boiling broth with barley, potatoes or turnips, whatever they had. Sometimes a handful of oatmeal thickened the mix into a filling porridge. The result was warm, nourishing and free. In those desperate spring months known as the Hungry Gap, nettle soup wasn't a delicacy. It was survival in a bowl. Today we might call it foraging. Back then it was simply common sense, knowing the land well enough to eat from it when nothing else grew. Barley coffee. Comfort without coffee. During World War II, real coffee vanished from shelves almost overnight. Ships that once carried beans were diverted to military use or lost to blockades. But people still craved the ritual, that morning comfort, that warmth that said life goes on. So they made do. The secret? Roasted barley. Barley grains were cleaned, toasted slowly over open fires until dark brown, then ground and brewed just like coffee. No caffeine, but plenty of flavour. Smoky, nutty, rich. Families even blended in roasted chicory or acorns for depth. It wasn't just about taste, it was psychological fuel. In a time of chaos, a cup of something familiar could steady a person's spirit as much as a meal could fill their stomach. When fresh vegetables vanished in winter, one humble crop kept people alive. Cabbage, but not raw cabbage, fermented cabbage. Sauerkraut became the unsung hero of countless cellars. Shredded cabbage layered with salt and pressed into barrels created its own natural brine. Over a few weeks, good bacteria worked their magic, transforming it into a tangy, vitamin-packed food that could last the entire season. This wasn't a modern probiotic trend. It was survival chemistry. Sauerkraut provided critical vitamin C and minerals, protecting families from malnutrition and disease. It required no refrigeration, no electricity, and no dependence on supply chains. Just cabbage, salt, and thyme. When you think about crisis-proof food, this is it. Low-tech, high-value, and nearly indestructible. By the war's second year, potatoes were the backbone of every European kitchen. They were easy to grow, store, and fill you up fast. But monotony kills morale. So families transformed them into golden, crispy potato pancakes. Grated potatoes mixed with a touch of flour, maybe an egg if luck allowed, and fried in precious drippings or oil. The result was simple but uplifting. Warm, crisp edges, soft centres, and the smell of something that felt like comfort. They travelled well, fed workers in the fields, and gave families something to smile about when little else did. In hard times, that mattered. Because survival isn't just about calories. It's about hope served hot from the pan. What we now call a weed was once wartime's secret salad. Young dandelion leaves, picked before they turned bitter, were packed with vitamins A and C, essential nutrients after long winters of tinned food and starches. Families rinsed the greens, added a splash of vinegar or pickle brine, and sometimes mixed them with boiled potatoes. It was fresh, sharp, alive, a reminder that nature provides even when stores don't. In the chaos of war, the people who survived longest were often those who could look at a patch of ground and see a meal growing there. Ration coupons allowed for only tiny cuts of meat, so families had to stretch every ounce. The strategy was simple, but brilliant. Use the flavour, not just the flesh. Small scraps or bones were simmered slowly with whatever was available. Carrots, onions, turnips, cabbage, barley or beans. The broth absorbed every trace of fat and mineral from the meat, turning a few bites into a pot that could feed 6. Even the bones went back in after stripping, boiled again to release marrow. Nothing was wasted. This stretching philosophy turned scarcity into abundance. And it's just as relevant today. Knowing how to make a little go far isn't just thrift, it's resilience. When winter hit and apples began to rot in cellars, resourceful families didn't throw them out. They made fruit leather. Bruised windfall apples were chopped, simmered, mashed, and spread thin on cloth to dry by the fire. Hours later, they peeled away a chewy, naturally sweet sheet that could last for months without refrigeration. It was candy without sugar, storage without cans, and nutrition without waste. In an age before freezers, this simple trick turned a perishable crop into a long-term energy source, the perfect survival food. These recipes weren't born from abundance, they were forged in scarcity. They remind us that survival isn't about what's in your pantry, it's about what's in your head. The families who lived through those years didn't rely on supply chains or supermarkets. They relied on knowledge, the kind that doesn't expire, doesn't spoil, and doesn't depend on anyone else to provide. In a world where food insecurity is once again a growing threat, these old world lessons feel urgent. They teach us that with a little creativity, a little patience, and a willingness to learn from the past, we can feed ourselves through anything. If this kind of forgotten wisdom inspires you, don't let it disappear. Hit subscribe to The Forgotten Fronts, share this video, and help keep these survival skills alive, because the knowledge that once fed the world might be what feeds us next.